Ethan sat in the cramped cockpit of his starship, the shuttle Nomad navigating through the dense asteroid field of the outer rim. The work was routine, fixing minor malfunctions for the local mining colonies, running errands for the low-paying clients. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept food on the table and gas in the tanks. He liked it that way. Life was simple, or at least, that's what he thought. A sudden beep interrupted his thoughts. It was a message, delivered by an unknown Galactic courier. The tone of the message was formal, almost cold, and as Ethan opened the transmission, he was greeted by a strange, unfamiliar logo. "Dear Mr. Ethan Matthews, we are writing to inform you that you have been chosen as the legal heir to a significant estate. In addition, you have inherited the responsibility of caring for Princess Zara, the only daughter of King Theron IV of the Vrest Dominion. The inheritance, including the estate and a princess of great importance, is now legally yours, effective immediately. Yours sincerely, the Galactic Inheritance Bureau. P.S. The Galactic Council has been notified of your new status. There may be certain protocols to follow." Ethan blinked at the message, unsure if he was dreaming or if the message had been sent to the wrong person. Princess? He didn't know the first thing about royalty, let alone alien monarchies. He scratched his head and leaned back in his seat. Princess Zara? What kind of joke is this? He muttered to himself. But the message was clear. And it was, addressed to him, his name. There had to be some mistake. He quickly called up the Galactic Registry on his console, trying to make sense of what was happening. But when he saw the name Zara Vrest in the records, everything changed. She was no ordinary princess. The daughter of King Theron IV, leader of the Vrest Dominion, a race known for their advanced technology and fierce military might. Yet, this princess was not seen in the public eye. Zara was considered an embarrassment to the royal family. Her father, King Theron, had kept her hidden away, far from the spotlight. Ethan leaned forward, rereading the message. It said nothing about why he, a simple mechanic from a backwater planet, would inherit a princess. There was no explanation, no clues, just a cold statement of facts. He leaned back in his seat again, this time rubbing his temples. His simple life had just taken a confusing turn. Maybe it's just a scam, he thought. A mistake. But something inside him urged him to investigate. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the idea that just once, something extraordinary could happen to him. He set the course for the distant Vrest Dominion. His mind raced. The estate, whatever that meant, sounded like a good starting point. He couldn't imagine what he was supposed to do with a princess, let alone why the Galactic Council had sent him this inheritance. Maybe it was some sort of diplomatic agreement gone wrong, or an eccentric noble trying to stir up trouble. But one thing was clear. Ethan was now part of something far bigger than anything he'd ever imagined. A few days later, the shuttle Nomad emerged from hyperspace, entering the heart of the Vrest Dominion. The view from the cockpit was breathtaking. A massive planetary system surrounded by shimmering nebulae, with a city-like structure hanging in the sky. He couldn't help but stare at the sight for a moment. The technology here was far beyond what he'd ever seen. His ship, though sturdy, felt like an ancient relic in comparison. Upon arrival, an alien official greeted him. The creature's face was adorned with intricate tattoos, and it spoke with an air of authority that left little room for negotiation. "Human Ethan Matthews," it said in a deep voice. "Welcome to the Vrest Dominion." The official led him through the palace grounds, a sprawling complex that seemed to stretch on forever. Everything about the place was grand, towering marble columns, crystal-clear waters, and statues of strange alien figures that looked almost alive. But despite its beauty, there was something unsettling about the place. It felt empty, like a grand stage with no audience. Finally, they arrived at a secluded wing of the palace. The official stopped at a door made of black polished stone and gestured for Ethan to enter. He stepped inside, his heart pounding with anticipation. There, sitting by a large window overlooking a serene garden, was Princess Zara. She didn't look like a typical royal. Her face was striking but cold, with features that could belong to a warrior or a diplomat. Her long silver hair cascaded down her shoulders, but her eyes, those eyes, held a distant, almost vacant look, as if she were far away in her thoughts. Zara didn't stand when he entered. She simply looked up at him with a glance that seemed to bore into his soul. "You're the one they sent?" she asked, her voice softer than expected but filled with an air of indifference. "The human mechanic who inherited my fate?" Ethan wasn't sure what to say. This wasn't what he had imagined, but this was real. She was real. And now he was responsible for her. I don't know what to say," Ethan stammered. This doesn't make sense." "Why me?" Zara sighed, turning her gaze back to the garden. "It never makes sense, does it?" she replied almost to herself. "But you'll find out soon enough." The official left them alone, and Ethan stood there, unsure of what to do. He was now bound by law to care for this princess, this alien royal who seemed like a ghost of her former self. She was more than just an inheritance. She was a key to something larger, something Ethan couldn't yet understand. As he watched her in silence, he wondered how he had gone from a simple mechanic to the guardian of a princess who was despised by her own people. But somehow, deep down, he felt that this strange inheritance might just be the beginning of something that would change everything. Ethan stood silently in the grand room, his eyes still fixed on Princess Zara. Her gaze was distant, as if she wasn't entirely present in the moment. The silence between them stretched on, awkward and heavy, until Ethan couldn't take it anymore. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice a little more uncertain than he intended. Zara turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable. "What now?" she repeated almost to herself. "That's a question I've asked myself for years." Ethan shifted on his feet. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but this wasn't it. He had hoped for some explanation, some sense of purpose in all of this, but there was only silence. It was as if she had given up on life altogether. "Why did your father send me?" Ethan asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Why me? I'm just a mechanic." Zara's lips curled into a faint, almost bitter smile. "You're not just a mechanic. You're the one who now owns everything," she said, gesturing to the lavish palace around them. "You're the one who now bears the weight of this inheritance, for better or worse. They don't care who you are, Ethan. They just care that you've been legally bound to take care of me." Ethan frowned. He couldn't understand. She spoke as if she were resigned to her fate, as if this was all some cruel joke, but there had to be more to it. His thoughts raced. Why had the king chosen to cast her aside? Why was she being kept in this isolated palace, away from the world? And why, above all, had he been chosen? Before he could voice another question, Zara stood and walked to the window, staring out at the garden below. The view was stunning. The gardens stretched for miles, with brightly colored alien plants and tall, strange trees. But even the beauty of the scenery didn't seem to interest her. "The Vrest Dominion," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "It's not what it used to be. My father's kingdom has fallen into decay, but he still clings to his power, his pride. And She paused, shaking her head. "I was never meant to be his heir." "Not really." Ethan was quiet, watching her closely. He could sense the sadness in her voice, a deep sadness that seemed to go beyond her royal status. She was not the cold, distant princess he had expected. There was something more to her, something hidden beneath the layers of her royal facade. "Why do you say that?" he asked, trying to understand. Zara turned back to him, her eyes cold but searching. "Because I'm not what he wanted. I'm not what anyone wanted. I was supposed to be a perfect heir, a symbol of the Vrest Dominion's future. But I wasn't. I was too different." Ethan frowned. "Different how?" Zara's expression hardened. "They call me a failure. They say I lack the strength, the grace, the power needed to lead. My mind doesn't fit their idea of royalty. And so I was cast aside, locked away in this palace as if I were nothing more than an embarrassment. Ethan was taken aback. He hadn't expected her to open up like this. He had assumed she would be cold, distant, even angry. But this wasn't the princess he had imagined. There was pain in her words, a deep unspoken hurt. "You're not a failure," Ethan said quietly. "You just haven't had the chance to prove yourself." Zara looked at him, her eyes flickering with something. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just disbelief. "Prove myself?" she asked, her voice soft. "How do I prove myself when the whole galaxy has already decided who I am?" Ethan shook his head. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You're a person, not an idea. You're not some broken heir." She stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. For a brief instant he thought she might say something, but she only sighed and turned back to the window. "I've been here for years, Ethan," she said, her voice barely audible. "And in all that time, I've never had the chance to live my own life. I've always been someone's daughter, someone's pawn. The council laughs at me. The days that followed were a blur of strange, unfamiliar routines." Ethan, still trying to adjust to the idea of being the guardian of a princess, found himself learning more about the Vrest Dominion than he ever thought he would. It wasn't just about palaces and high society. It was about power, politics, and secrets that ran deeper than the stars themselves. Zara, however, remained distant. While she had opened up a little to Ethan, she still wore the heavy armor of her past. She rarely left the palace except for brief walks in the garden, where she seemed to lose herself in thought. Ethan spent most of his time exploring the estate, trying to keep himself busy while figuring out what his next step should be. But he was starting to see that this wasn't going to be a simple matter of inheritance. There were too many forces at play, and he wasn't sure he had the experience to handle it all. One afternoon, as he sat in the main hall, going over some of the old records that had been left behind in the palace's archives, a soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, setting down the datapad he had been studying. The door opened, and a tall, armored figure stepped inside. At first glance, Ethan thought it was just another royal guard, but this one stood with an air of authority. The figure was humanoid, but had skin that shimmered like liquid silver, and the helmet was shaped like a dragon's head, with glowing, red eyes peering out from within. "I have come on behalf of Princess Zara," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, as if it were echoing from the very depths of space. "I am General Thalor of the Vrest military." Ethan stood up, startled. He had heard of the Vrest military, but he hadn't expected to be in the presence of one of their top generals so soon. "General," Ethan greeted cautiously. "What brings you here?" Thalor's glowing eyes fixed on him, and there was a moment of silence before the general spoke again. "I wish to speak of the princess and her future," he said, his tone firm but not unfriendly. "You see, Ethan Matthews, this inheritance you have received is not a mere accident. It is part of something far greater than you realize." Ethan's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" The general stepped forward, lowering his helmet to reveal his face. His features were sharp, alien in nature, but his expression was grave, as if burdened with the weight of many secrets. "The Vrest Dominion is on the brink of a new era," Thalor began. "A time of revolution, of change. King Theron's rule is faltering, and the galaxy knows it. What many do not realize, however, is that Princess Zara holds the key to saving the Dominion. The artifact she carries, the one that was deemed too dangerous by her father, it is more than just a symbol. It is the means to power, and the Galactic Council will do everything in its power to keep it from falling into the wrong hands." Ethan's mind raced. He had heard the rumors, the whispers about Zara being more than just an ordinary princess. But now it was becoming clear. Zara was far more than anyone had ever let on. "What artifact?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Thalor's eyes softened just for a moment. "It is an ancient relic, one that predates even the Vrest Dominion itself. It was hidden away for centuries, locked in a vault, its power too great for any single ruler to wield. But Zara, is its true heir. Only she can unlock its potential. Ethan stared at him, trying to process everything the general was saying. And what does that have to do with me? Thaler's expression became more intense. You, Ethan Matthews, have been chosen for a reason. The Galactic Council, the same body that laughs at the idea of a human inheriting a princess, has seen something in you. Your connection to Zara is not mere chance. You are part of a larger plan, whether you realize it or not. Ethan was speechless. He had thought this whole situation was a mistake, a bizarre twist of fate, but now it seemed there was more to it than he could have ever imagined. He wasn't just a mechanic stuck in an absurd inheritance. He was part of something that could change the fate of an entire galaxy. And what happens if we don't act? Ethan asked, trying to steady his voice. Thaler's eyes darkened. The Council will stop at nothing to ensure that Zara and the artifact remain hidden, controlled, or destroyed. If they succeed, the Dominion will crumble. The power balance in the galaxy will shift, and chaos will reign. Ethan felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had never wanted any of this. He was just a guy who fixed chips. But now he was responsible for the fate of a princess, the future of a galaxy, and the mysterious artifact that could either save or destroy everything. You said I've been chosen, Ethan said, more to himself than to the general. But why me? What do I have that makes me part of this? Thaler's gaze softened again, just a little. Sometimes, the most unlikely people are the ones who change the course of history, he said. And sometimes, the smallest action can lead to the greatest consequences. Ethan stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Thaler's words settling in. He had always lived a quiet, unremarkable life. Now he was at the center of a galactic struggle with no idea how to proceed. Will you help us, Ethan Matthews? Thaler asked, his voice steady, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Ethan looked at him, then at the door that led to the rest of the palace, where Zara waited. The princess he had been assigned to care for, who had seemed so distant and lost. But she wasn't just a princess. She was the key to something greater, something that could change everything. I don't know if I can, Ethan replied slowly, his voice filled with uncertainty. But I'll try. I'll do what I can. Thaler nodded, his expression unreadable. Then you are not alone, Ethan Matthews. There are others who will help, and together, we will ensure that Zara's future is not defined by the Council or her father's mistakes. Ethan nodded, though the uncertainty still lingered in his chest. But something had changed in him. He no longer saw himself as just a mechanic caught in an absurd situation. He saw himself as part of something much larger, a mission that would test his strength, his resolve, and his loyalty. The fate of the galaxy had just been thrust into his hands. The days following Thaler's visit were tense. Ethan couldn't shake the weight of the information the Vrest general had shared. Zara, it seemed, wasn't just a forgotten princess in a distant palace. She was the key to the future of the Vrest Dominion, and the entire galaxy was watching, waiting for her to either rise or fall. And somehow Ethan was caught in the middle of it all. Zara, still as distant as ever, had yet to fully trust him. Despite his attempts to connect with her, she remained a shadow of the person she could have been. He couldn't blame her, though. She had been discarded by her own father and left to languish in this grand, empty palace, far from the power and glory she should have had as an heir. But things were changing. Even as Zara closed herself off, the world outside the palace was beginning to move. Ethan had begun hearing whispers, rumors that the Galactic Council, the very same organization that had mocked him when they learned of his inheritance, had started to take a much more active interest in Zara and the artifact she carried. He had no idea how, but he knew the Council wasn't going to sit back and let a piece of ancient power slip through their fingers. It all came to a head one afternoon when Ethan was working on the ship's systems in one of the palace's many empty corridors. He had just finished replacing a power coil when the sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. Looking up, he saw Zara, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. "They're coming," she whispered, breathless. Ethan stood up quickly, wiping his hands on his pants. "Who? What's going on? The Galactic Council, Zara said, her voice trembling. They know. They know about the artifact. And they're coming for me. Ethan's heart raced. The council wasn't just going to sit by anymore. He had suspected they would come, but not this quickly. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He was supposed to protect her. He had to do something. Are you sure? Ethan asked, trying to steady his breath. How do you know? I overheard the guards, she said, her eyes darting around nervously. They've been ordered to capture me, to bring me to the council. They don't care about me anymore. Ethan, they care about what I hold, the artifact. Ethan's mind was spinning. He didn't know what to do, but he knew one thing. Zara couldn't be left alone, not now. We have to get you out of here, he said, his voice sharp. We need to go now. Zara's eyes flashed with uncertainty, but she nodded. I don't know where we can go. The Dominion's borders are heavily guarded. The council has eyes everywhere. We'll figure it out, Ethan said, grabbing her arm gently but firmly. I don't care where we go, but we can't stay here. The two of them moved quickly through the palace, avoiding the watchful eyes of the guards. Ethan wasn't sure where they were going. He wasn't even sure what their next move was. But he knew one thing. They couldn't stay in the palace any longer. They needed to escape. As they neared the back exit, the sound of boots echoed through the hallways. Ethan's heart pounded. They were getting closer. Quick, this way, he urged, pulling Zara into a narrow side corridor. They ducked into the shadows just as a group of soldiers rounded the corner, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Zara's breath came in shallow gasps, her body tense. Ethan kept his hand. The shuttle Nomad drifted silently through space, the hum of its engines the only sound in the cockpit. Ethan kept his hands on the controls, his eyes constantly scanning the radar. Zara sat beside him, her posture stiff, her mind clearly elsewhere. She had barely spoken since they had left the palace, and Ethan knew that the weight of what was happening had finally settled on her shoulders. They were no longer just running from the Galactic Council. Now, they were fugitives, marked for capture. The artifact that Zara carried was too powerful for anyone to let go, and the Council would stop at nothing to reclaim it. Ethan had been in tight spots before, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher than anything he had faced in his life. It wasn't just his life at risk now. It was Zara's, and the fate of the galaxy itself seemed to hang in the balance. We'll be safe for a while, Ethan said, trying to break the silence. We're out of their range for now, but we can't stay in one place for too long. Zara glanced at him, but her expression was distant. She seemed to be lost in her thoughts, her mind swirling with the sudden turn of events. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I never meant for any of this to happen. You were just a mechanic. You didn't deserve to get dragged into this. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. You didn't ask for any of this either. We're both stuck in it now, but that doesn't mean we can't figure out a way out. Zara looked at him, a faint flicker of something, trust maybe, shone in her eyes. How can we fix this, Ethan? The council is too powerful. And my father. He's the one who put me in this position. I've always been a failure to him. Ethan shook his head. You're not a failure. And the only thing that matters now is getting you to safety. We'll figure out what the artifact is and how to use it to fight back. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that nothing is as impossible as it seems, especially when you have someone to fight with. Zara didn't respond, but Ethan could see that his words had reached her. For the first time since they had met, she seemed to relax just a little. Maybe there was hope after all. The next few hours were spent in silence, save for the occasional beep from the ship's systems. They were heading toward a remote system on the edge of the galaxy, one of the few places that might offer them a temporary refuge. The system was small, hardly known to the larger galactic factions, and would give them a chance to regroup and plan their next move. But just as they approached the outskirts of the system, the ship's alarm suddenly blared. Ethan's heart sank as the radar screen flashed red. Shit, he muttered under his breath, his fingers flying over the controls. We've been detected. The ship's cloaking system had hidden them well. but not well enough. Someone had found their trail. Zara's eyes widened. The council? Ethan shook his head, his mind racing. It's not the council, it's something else. A shadow flickered across the screen, something large and fast. Ethan tried to engage evasive maneuvers, but the unknown ship was too close. It had already locked onto them, and its weapons were charging. Brace yourself, Ethan shouted, pulling the ship into a sudden roll to avoid the incoming blast. The shuttle Nomad rocked violently, but they managed to avoid the first wave of fire. I don't know who this is, but they don't want us escaping. Zara gripped the edge of her seat, her knuckles white. Who are they? What do they want? Ethan didn't answer. The truth was, he didn't know. But the ship chasing them wasn't like anything he had ever seen. It was sleek, angular, and clearly built for speed and combat. There was something eerily familiar about it, but he couldn't place it. He twisted the controls again, sending the ship into another sharp dive, but this time, the other ship followed. Damn, Ethan growled, his eyes locked on the incoming ship. We can't outrun them like this, I need to fight back. He began calculating a quick counterattack, his fingers moving faster than his mind could fully process. He had never been in a full-on battle in space before, but he wasn't about to let them catch them without a fight. The enemy ship fired again, and this time Ethan couldn't avoid the blast. The shuttle Nomad shuddered violently as the hull took a hit. Warning lights flashed and the ship's energy levels dipped. They were losing power. We've got to land, Ethan said, desperation creeping into his voice. I need to find a place to land now. Zara glanced at him, her eyes wide with fear. Where? Ethan scanned the nearby planets. There was one, a barren, rocky world with no known population, just the kind of place they could land and try to hide. But there was no time to waste. Hold on tight, he said, pulling the ship into a sharp turn and heading for the planet below. The enemy ship followed, but it was slower now. The shuttle Nomad's speed was starting to show its advantages. As they neared the planet's atmosphere, Ethan adjusted their descent. He had to make this count. One wrong move, and they would be sitting ducks. The shuttle Nomad crashed through the atmosphere with a jarring shake. The outer shields flickered as they entered the thick air. The ground below was rocky and uneven, but it was the best chance they had. Ethan grit his teeth and fought to keep control. With a final violent jolt, the ship hit the ground, skidding across the rocky surface before coming to a rough halt. Ethan exhaled, his heart still racing. We're here. But just as he unbuckled his seatbelt, Zara's voice stopped him cold. There's something wrong, she said, her voice shaking. They know we're here. Ethan turned, his gaze narrowing. There was no time to rest. The battle was far from over. The shuttle Nomad lay still, its hull smoking slightly from the harsh landing. Ethan quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, his eyes scanning the rocky terrain outside. They had crash-landed on a barren planet, the surface covered in jagged stones and dust. The ship's systems had been damaged, and there was no time to waste. They were exposed, and the enemy ship wasn't far behind. We need to move, Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. Get your things. We're not staying here. Zara looked at him, her expression still filled with fear. She had been through so much, and this moment only added to the pressure. Where do we go, Ethan? The planet is empty, there's no shelter, no way to hide. Ethan grabbed his backpack and moved toward the door, his mind racing. The enemy ship was closing in, and he knew it wouldn't be long before they would have to fight for their lives. But what did they have to fight with? A broken-down ship and no real weapons. Still, Ethan wasn't ready to give up. Not now. We'll head into the caves, he said, pointing toward a series of dark openings in the distant cliffs. There's a chance we can lose them there. We'll figure out what to do once we're hidden. Zara hesitated but nodded. She knew they didn't have much of a choice. She grabbed a few items from the ship before following Ethan toward the rocky cliffs. The air was thin and the wind howled around them, sending dust swirling in the air. But they had no time to waste. The enemy was coming. They moved quickly, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the rough, dry ground beneath their boots. As They neared the caves, a faint rumble echoed through the air, and Ethan glanced over his shoulder. The enemy ship had arrived, hovering just above the surface. Ethan's heart raced. "We're almost there," he muttered, pushing himself forward. They reached the entrance of the nearest cave, ducking inside to find shelter. The cave was dark and cold, the walls jagged and uneven. Ethan and Zara both took a moment to catch their breath, their backs against the rough stone. Zara's voice broke the silence. "What now?" Ethan looked at her, his mind working quickly. The ship was in no condition to fly again, and the enemy ship was still circling overhead. He had to think of something, and fast. "There's a chance we can make the ship work again," Ethan said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "But we'll need time. Time we don't have." Zara's eyes widened and she shook her head. "Ethan, they'll find us soon. We need to do something now." He paused, looking at her. The desperation in her eyes mirrored his own. They were running out of options, and the enemy wasn't going to let them hide forever. He had to take a risk. "There's one more thing we can try," Ethan said. "It's dangerous, but it might just work." Zara looked at him, her face pale but curious. "What do you mean?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He knew the risk. What he was about to do could either save them or get them both killed. He had no choice but to try. "I need to access the ship's backup systems," Ethan explained. "There's a chance I can get the cloaking device back online, at least long enough for us to escape, but I'll have to manually reboot the main controls. It's risky, and the council might still find us before we can get away, but it's our best shot." Zara swallowed hard, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. "And if it doesn't work?" "Then we fight," Ethan said simply. "And we make our stand." Zara took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "I trust you." Ethan gave her a quick, reassuring smile before turning and heading back toward the ship. As they made their way back through the caves, the sound of the enemy ship's engines grew louder. Time was running out. The cloaking device was their only hope. Once they reached the shuttle Nomad, Ethan hurried to the control panel, his hands moving with practiced speed. He plugged in a data cable to bypass the damaged systems and began working his way through the ship's emergency protocols. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked, the tension building with each passing second.